Okay, I think we start. Welcome everyone. My name is Markus Sten. I work at SINTEF in Norway, and I'm part of this Geography of Sustainability Transitions thematic group, which is part of the Sustainability Transitions Research Network. And we organized a set of webinars over the last years, and this is the fourth webinar series. And this time we decided it was very timely to focus on the global dimension of sustainability transitions. And we started this webinar series 2 weeks back. I'll get back to that. I'm very happy to see so many people here today. We have a great set of speakers, and we'll have time for a Q&A session. So just a couple of practicalities. The webinar is being recorded, and it will be made publicly available afterwards. And also, please remember to mute your microphones, but feel free to turn on your cameras so that we can see you. So without much further ado, well, I should say that this is co-organized, of course, with a great group of people, with Jonathan Friedrich at Lund University, Guren Gong at Stavanger University, and my colleague Mari Vardeberg here at SINTEF. So the intentions with this webinar series is that we want to really create the space for cross-fertilization and exchanging ideas across these different domains, sustainability transitions on the one hand, and global value chain and global production network research on the other. And we see there's a lot of interesting potential there for identifying trading zones where we can learn from one another. So this is really a core idea. And to do that, we invite different scholars representing these different communities to present and discuss around some predefined topics. So this is also part of something we see as a broader research agenda here at this very interesting to us intersection. So as I said, we kicked off a couple of weeks back, and today we are focusing on incumbents, power and governance in value chains. And we have Stefano Ponte with us from CBS. We have Jamila Lesh from EIST and Bugge Hunt from Copenhagen University. And just to remind you that there will be 2 more webinars, so one in about 2 weeks' time from now, and then one after Easter. So I don't think I'll spend too much time on this. This will be made available and you can all read, but I think it's a really nice set of different scholars. So Stefano Ponte is professor at CBS in Copenhagen, and I think is a very prominent figure in the GVC field, both conceptually and empirically. And then we have 2 more, let's say, early career researchers. So Bugge Hunt is a postdoc, working, maybe I would say, more coming from the sort of GP and GVC side into transition studies, working on hard-to-abate sectors. And Jamila Lesh at EIST, maybe more from the transition side, working on these infrastructure sectors that are sort of where the transition dynamics are very much subject to, let's say, global regime dynamics. So I think it's a really nice set of speakers. We've given them about 10 minutes each to present, and then we'll do all the questions after the 3 presentations. So I think that was the last slide I wanted to share now. So I will stop sharing and I will give the virtual floor to Stefano.
Thank you very much. Can you see my slide?
No? Yes.
Yes or no?
No.
Now? Okay, and I'll start again. Let's see. We just tried it and it worked okay. I'm gonna share. I think it's working now. Let's see. Is it working now?
No.
That's weird.
Was that? Yeah. We kind of almost saw it and then it disappeared again.
Oh, really? Okay. Let's see. Share. Now?
Now we see it. Great.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. So 10 minutes. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to share some insights from a book that I just published a few months ago that I think are hopefully relevant for the discussion that we are having in terms of the crossover between sustainability transitions and global value chains, global production network analysis. And so the book is it's called Value Struggles, and value intended as both a value, but also ethical and normative values and how they come together. And I use the case study of the global value chain for wine as an empirical focus, but it is a sort of theoretically oriented book, and you can download it for free with that with the Q square there. We bought the open access fee, and so you can have it on your desk. Or if you're like me, that I like real books, you can always get it from Amazon or Bloomsbury Academic. So what I'm trying to do here today is to lay out the argument in ways that then speak to some of the issues that we will be discussing. So the argument in the book is that to understand sustainability transition, sustainability more generally, we need to unpack the forms of capital accumulation that underpin these transitions or play against them. So in value chains, this means looking at processes of value creation, redistribution, and capture. And those processes, especially the capturing value added, we've done a lot of research that says that value added is captured because incumbents, so big lead firms in value chains, have superior bargaining power over their suppliers, and essentially they tell them what to do, what kind of sustainability element they want, and then they squeeze them because they pay the same prices and add a lot of other functions that they need to carry out. Then there is regulation that could benefit smaller producers, but generally also in general benefits capital against labor and nature. My argument in the book is that those kind of processes of value appropriation are also based on struggles around conflicting values and related valuation practices. So the normative forms of power in global value chains that Mark Dallas and I and Tim Sturgeon are trying to develop theoretically. Now, this builds on a previous book that I published in 2019, where I went into some level of detail in showing how sustainability has been used for green capital accumulation in global value chains, but from a very materialist perspective and a more classic sort of value chain perspective. In this book, I basically go deeper into one value chain, and then I try to open up the normative side of those struggles. This is how the book looks like in terms of table of contents. So the first part is more introductory, and so the theoretical reflection on value and values and the connections between these two. I focus especially on South African and Italian wine value chains, where I did a lot of fieldwork in South Africa. I've been doing it for quite a number of years, and then I highlight what I call three sides of value struggle. One is related to place, the second is related to nature, and the third to people, for a lack of a better term, but essentially I look at dynamics of race, class, and gender. With you today, I'm going to share very briefly only some very selective findings in relation to nature, since we're talking about environmental sustainability especially. So value struggles around nature. In the book, I basically unpack the way in which regulation and governance of environmental concerns plays out in the global value chain for wine. And interestingly, the main driver of sustainability concerns in wine came into the fray of sustainability transitions very late in comparison to other agri-food value chains. And essentially, it was the alcohol monopolies of the Nordics and some Canadian states that started to essentially write the rules related to what kind of standards will be covered and how those will come together. And those standards then were copied and adopted by other supermarket chains elsewhere in Europe and the US as well, and became sort of a sort of a normative driver for everyone else. And so looking at how especially the Swedish monopoly organization wrote those is part of the work that I do in the book. Now, there is also a lot of pressure to establish a global wine sustainability certification. There is something called the Sustainable Wine Roundtable that is trying to do that, but there is a lot of pushback from the industry because wine is very diversified, and the idea is that if we have 100,000 types of wine, how can it be that we can have one certification? Am I still sharing my screen because it did a little bit of a weird thing?
We lost your slides there.
We lost
Sorry?
your slides. Your slides are gone.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really acting out. Let me share again. Is it back now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then I also go into other debates that are quite important in relation to sustainability transitions in the wine sector, in the discussion of what is natural in natural wines. And so all these kind of new approaches to a very hands-off kind of way of making wines and what it means in terms of the distribution of value added. And then a discussion about ecology, conservation, and beauty, which is quite important in that realm. Some reflections on organic wine. Organic wine has become fairly popular. The problem is that the way in which organic wine is bought, especially and even by the Nordic monopolies, requires quite a good bit of extra expenditures for grape farmers and winemakers without a price premium very often, and therefore it has side effects on social and labor conditions of production. Biodynamic wines and regenerative viticulture in general is becoming very, very popular. A very interesting way of doing a sustainability transition, a very holistic one, but still essentially a very, very tiny niche that is expanding in especially in Italy, in France, but also other places. And the reason also I'm mentioning biodiversity, conservation, and beauty is because we have this idea that there is an understanding in the sustainability transitions that the environment counts per se as a value to be preserved. But in many practical applications of sustainability initiatives in the wine industry, it's really related to nature as the beauty of nature. And so it is actually very much essentially made into the sustainability content of that is transformed into an aesthetic issue. And that has implications about what values are behind those kind of processes. I don't have that much time to go into detail, even theoretically, but in the question and answer, I'll be happy to explore more. One of the places where I would like to spend 1 or 2 minutes is the discussion about terroir, so the idea that the places are very specific and bring out a particular kind of wine that is typical of a particular area and authentic, and what climate change is doing to this particular idea, which is quite important for value creation. And climate change, essentially, the climate change puzzle is how do you square the change in geography of wine production, the essentially wine that has been produced, that was produced for a long time in a particular place, does not have the same characteristics because it's getting warmer, it's raining less, and therefore the idea of terroir that is local, local, constant is under attack by the fact that there is nothing constant about climate change. So the kind of styles of champagne that you had 20 years ago in France now, they're struggling to make those, and therefore the actual best wines that are of that sort, you now find them in southern England. And so the bubblies that are coming, they cannot be called champagne, but those kind of styles are made there, and in champagne they're having serious trouble. That has a lot of implications about the political economy of value and the way in which the value chain is governed. There's a lot of initiatives in terms of the green transition in wine, a lot of really heavy demands on carbon footprinting, where the supermarket chains are trying to lower their carbon footprint, and they're basically downloading all the work on the grape farmers and winemakers in order to find ways in which they can cut that. A lot of mitigation measures that are in place. I know also some adaptation measures with resistant varieties that have been developed in the last 20 years. So the climatic conditions for producing typical wines are changing. And so there will be new ways that we need to account for ideas of tradition, authenticity, and heritage that I actually develop a little bit more in the book. So 3 takeaways that I am going to send with you in the short time that I had available to share these reflections. One is in the agri-food sector, we usually look at wine for inspiration. Inspiration in terms of the diversification of products, the fanciness of it, and the fact that you still have small farmers that are able to produce wines that are appreciated and make a living out of a relatively small operation. So the wine industry usually is a source of hope in safeguarding small producers. There has been a lot of growth of organic and biodynamics. However, the majority of wine sold is actually mainstream and doesn't have any of these things involved. It's all about price and technical specificities. Now, even the valorizations of nature are being themselves homogenized through standards, certifications, codes of conduct, which is what is facilitating further capital accumulation and extraction of value by the incumbents, as you call them in the title of the webinar. So the big buyers, merchants, and retailers, and that is actually being used to further squeeze the margins for smaller producers. My computer has decided that it stopped sharing again. So, but I was at the end of it. So whatever is happening now, it's going to be over. So I'm going to give the word to the next one. Okay.
That was very timely. Thank you, Stefano. Excellent presentation. It's possible to use the applause button for everyone. Okay, Oliver is up next. So let's hope.
Yeah, I'll try and share my slides.
Yeah, see if it works.
See if it works.
If not, we have a backup here.
Yeah, just 1 second. I'm just gonna.
So while okay.
Oh, just 1 second. I'm just gonna. You can just go, Marcus. What were you about to say?
While Oliver is setting up. For the Q&A, you can put your questions in the chat. Let's see how much time we have. Maybe we can also do a couple of questions already.
Okay.
Okay, Oliver, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, and thank you so much for the organizing committee for inviting me. So now, as indicated by my title, my presentation is quite specific. So throughout these next 8-9 minutes, I'm going to try and sketch out where I think that a GPN, GVC perspective might help advance sustainability transitions research on incumbents. Now, let's see if I can switch. Yeah, so incumbents play a quite prominent role in sustainability transitions. They often have vested interest in maintaining the configuration of the way a certain service is provided. They also have disproportionate power. In that way, I think it makes great sense that ST research has been focusing on incumbent actors. And throughout this talk, I will mainly be focusing on incumbent firms. So early ST research has emphasized how incumbent actors were often opposing new innovations, preventing new technologies, niches from getting a foothold in markets. And this research has really sort of developed an account of how incumbents delay and obstruct transition process. This early work has sort of been gravitating towards incumbents' defense strategies for maintaining the status quo. However, more recent work has sort of been trying to pluralize the notion of incumbency, highlighting how they have varied responses to transition risk. And while incumbents may obstruct and delay transition processes, research has also shown how they can enable and support clean tech innovations. A good example of the latter might be EIST, right, who sort of transitioned from being a fossil fuel company and leveraged its earnings from the fossil fuel industry, its expertise in the offshore sector to help scale and the offshore wind industry. So I think the basic question sort of connected to this research is what sort of determines the strategies that incumbents pursue and how they build the capacity to perform their business models. And this is where I think that GPN and GVC in particular has something to offer sustainability transitions. I'm just going to try move this around 1 second. As they sort of draw attention to the ways in which incumbent firms are embedded and constrained by global networks of production. I'm going to try and switch slide here. Okay. So building on that, I want to show more specifically what a GPN GVC lens can add to sustainability transition research on incumbents. And I'll be making 3 points that sort of draw on a recent EIST perspective that I wrote with Christopher Morslev and you, Markus Steen, and also Thijs Hansen and Ulrik Hansen, who I gather will be presenting at another webinar as part of this series. So the first sort of insight that we can build on from GPN GVC research is that it offers a highly granular and context-dependent perspective on firms. It highlights that firm strategies are shaped by industry characteristics, market dynamics, but also the firm's position in these global value chains. I think this sort of helps us understand when and why incumbents engage with clean innovations and how they build the capacity in new sectors, but also why incumbents' engagement with decarbonization might vary across industry settings. Second, GPN GVC offers a relational perspective on incumbent firms that foregrounds inter-firm dynamics and coordination, what GPN and GVC scholars will often talk about as governance. On the one hand, such perspective helps us think about how powerful firms in value chains condition and steer suppliers' engagement with innovation and new industrial paths. I think this was also what Stefano was alluding to before. And on the other, it helps explain how incumbents' transformation, or even the lack thereof, by showing how transitions in one sector depends on capabilities and investments in other sectors. A good example might be a global shipping company like Maersk, who are slowed down by their dependence on oil and gas majors to scale low carbon molecule sectors, because fossil fuel companies control key capabilities in molecule markets. In other words, this draws attention to how incumbent strategies and capacity to transform partly rest on other incumbents in other networks who might not have similar incentives to pursue processes of decarbonization. Third, and this is sort of my final point, GPN GVC argues that governance and organization of cross-sectoral relationships are coordinated by lead firms that operate in a specific segment of a value chain, along with their strategies to assert control over supplier and buyer networks. This insight can help us think through how uneven power relations influences couplings between systems. EIST research has recently or increasingly argues that transitions involves couplings across multiple systems, and recent work has sort of teased out and foregrounded how these couplings are shaped by various system entanglers, but also the institutional work that is necessary to forging connections between distinctive systems. I think that a GPN GVC lens and its perspective on lead firms can help us think through how power relations that sort of transcend individual systems influence and shapes standards and norms and the practices that underpins multi-system interactions, which can help shed light on how dominant firms might extend their institutional logics across multiple systems. Now, I want to say a bit about what I think the sort of analytical implications of this argument is. I think generally what GPN and GVC perspective offer to debates on incumbents concerns the unit of analysis. In sustainability transition research, explanation explanations of incumbent behavior and incumbent strategy often focuses on the single firm, or its resource bases and its institutional/regulatory environment. The emphasis here is placed upon how external pressures, reputational risk, regulatory risk, and opportunities combined with internal company resources can trigger diversification and strategic reorganization. GPN and GVC perspectives also tend to draw on a resource-based view on the firm, as present in ST discussions on incumbent firms, but its distinct contribution is that it foregrounds inter-firm relationships and the governance of these relations. I think that this sort of invites us to analyze how value chain governance and industry characteristics, as well as market dynamics, shapes how firms valorize resources, identify new investable paths, and build new activities, often through both existing and emerging networks. In short, I think when we use GPN and GVC perspectives, to think about incumbents, the unit of analysis shifts from primarily focusing on the single firm, its regulatory environment, towards the governed network around it. That's it. I don't know how I was doing for time there, Marcus, but thank you.
Excellent. Give you the applause. Okay, no, that was great. I think we can also move on to Jamila right away. If you, Jamila, are ready to share, and everything seems to be, it's not in presentation mode yet.
Yeah.
There we go.
Can you see the presentation? Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Perfect. So I want to talk about how the geography of sustainability transitions has tackled questions of incumbency, and how actually a global regime perspective and the literature on GPNs and GVCs can be kind of complementary in understanding the quest of transition studies of how sectoral structures can be transformed. So in contrast to the GPN and GVC literature, transition studies has a strong focus on innovation in infrastructure sectors and is kind of concerned with how these innovations can contribute to transforming kind of unsustainable sectoral structures. And the notion of a global regime comes kind of from the recognition that infrastructure sectors around the world look surprisingly similar around the globe. And they look surprisingly similar because the context conditions, of course, like vary greatly across like different geographical contexts. And this applies to sectors such as the energy sector, but also the mobility sector and the housing sector. And the reason for that is that in sectors, there is a dominant institutional rationality, which depicts a structural pattern between actors, institutions, and technologies that has reached validity beyond specific territorial context and which is diffused through multi-scalar actor networks. And it's a lot, so I want to break it a bit down, and I want to talk first about like what we mean with institutional rationality. So usually societal services such as energy supply, waste management, but also urban water management are provided by combinations of technologies, actors, and institutions. And now when we see and observe that a particular combination of technology, actors, and institutions has reached quite like a dominance across different geographical contexts, we can speak of a dominant institutional rationality that has kind of evolved and guides actors in their decision of how they want to provide a societal function. So in the water sector, we observe, for example, that there is a gold standard of service provision, which revolves around like large-scale, capital-intensive infrastructure, public or private utilities, and then very rigid institutional frameworks. So this gold standard has become quite dominant because there is a multi-scalar actor network behind this gold standard that has really worked to diffuse this rationality across the globe. And here we have, on the one hand, multinational corporations. So multinational corporations include corporations that are also traditionally analyzed by the literature on GVCs and GPNs, such as chemical manufacturers, equipment manufacturers, and so on. But we think that for understanding global regime dynamics, we must in particular understand who is actually involved in designing, implementing, and operating the infrastructure, because these are the actors that will have actually the highest definitional authority in the sector and the most authority to create rationalities and then to diffuse them across the globe. So in the water sector, we see that we have private utilities, predominantly from France, Spain, but also increasingly from the US, that are diffusing this gold standard across the globe and are really contributing to the water management sector looking quite similar in different geographical contexts. But we also acknowledge that despite all the neoliberal efforts in the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, the urban water management sector still relies heavily on public sector provision. So we are asking ourselves, so who is it then that kind of diffuses these rationalities across the globe? And here we find that engineering consultancies actually play a very crucial role in diffusing this rationality across the globe, because they play a key role in advising public agencies on how they should implement urban water management solutions. And while this corporate network plays a big role in diffusing the rationality to especially high-income countries across the globe, we find that it's non-firm actors that play a big role in diffusing rationalities to more low and middle-income countries. So it is in particular international organizations such as development banks, but also donor organizations that consult and finance urban water management solutions around the globe. And here we can think, for example, of the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the German Organization of International Cooperation, and so on. So in the past, actually, a lot has been written about the World Bank being quite responsible for spreading the urban water management gold standard across the globe. And here is a map of the biggest urban water management projects of the World Bank in the past 25 years. And what we can see is that the map, like the firm actor network and the non-firm actor network, is actually quite complementary. In a paper with Christian Binz and Jörn Mörner, we have asked ourselves how can we actually use the spatial reach of the global regime actors and also their authority to spread alternative rationalities across the globe. Because traditionally, analysis of global regimes focus more on why do these global regime actors hinder local transitions, but like how can we use their the structures to make sustainability transitions work. So what we find is that it's like rarely actually engineering consultancies, private utilities, and also international organizations that will be the ones that come up with radical novel solutions. It will be more like advocates such as civil society organizations and academic institutions that pioneer alternative modes of service provision. But because there's quite a disconnect to the actors that actually implement the solutions on a larger scale on the ground, they need amplifiers, which are engineering consultancies and also, for example, international organizations. So they kind of possess a brokerage position in the sector. They have a wide spatial reach and also huge authority in technical, financial, and or legislative domains. So if advocates can kind of convince amplifiers to take up alternative visions to provide services in an alternative way, this will have a huge influence on different geographical contexts around the world at once. And this is what we showed in our paper, where we were investigating how an international coalition of advocates around the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation actually managed to change the funding rationale of the World Bank. So basically, the advocate coalition coined a new vision, a new rationality for providing urban water management services in low and middle income countries. So they were saying, okay, this gold standard really does not work. It's not context sensitive. We need new solutions, which can, for example, here you see on the slide, include these more low-cost solutions. So the coalition was very skillful, and they leveraged the World Bank by kind of creating a working group in the World Bank that really worked only on spreading this new rationality within the World Bank. And now, and this we have analyzed with using network analysis. So basically what you can see here is that from 2000 to 2009, the gold standard was mainly promoted, and in 2016 to 2021, this really shifted within the World Bank. So really this advocate coalition managed to change the funding rationale, and as I said, this will have huge implications to how urban water management solutions are provided in low and middle income countries. So I just want to end with some key considerations and takeaways. So even if alternative rationalities are being taken up by global regime actors, that does not mean that there will be a local transition. So this really depends on like who is creating the alternative rationality, how is the alternative rationality related to what is actually happening on the ground, and who has really the power to kind of create, but also diffuse this alternative rationality. And I think here we could really benefit from insights from the literature on GPNs and GVCs, on power asymmetries, and also on multiscalar power relations. And secondly, I think that infrastructure sectors could be potentially a very valuable boundary object for more integrative theorizing between the literature on global regimes and then GVCs and GPNs, because there's actually a high complementarity between both concepts. So with analyzing global regimes, we can ask how the directionality within infrastructure sectors can be transformed. So in what kind of direction infrastructure sectors develop. But then with the GPN and GVC literature, we can analyze how can this change actually be materialized on the ground. So how do we reconfigure the production networks and the value chains that we need to also kind of create the materiality that is needed to translate this change into reality. So by combining both perspectives, I think that we can answer the question of why certain solutions actually managed to kind of diffuse and to be successful and to, in the end, transform infrastructure sectors. So yeah, that was my input. Thank you.
Fantastic. So great. We have more than 20 minutes now for discussion, and you can put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. I've prepared a couple of questions for each of you that maybe could get this going. So I wanted to start maybe with you, Jamila, because I'm wondering, so thinking about global regimes as this kind of institutional superstructure, you mentioned this is sort of maybe very important for understanding change dynamics, potential for change in infrastructure sectors like water, sanitation, others. But how prevalent do you see these kind of global regimes as being? I mean, where do we find them, and are there sectors where we don't have them? I'm kind of mindfully asking these kind of questions at this level because I think we have a pretty mixed audience.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. So we have analyzed global regimes mainly in relation to infrastructure sectors. There are great contributions, for example, about the global regime in the heating sector, for example. But there's also, for example, one contribution in analyzing global regime structures in the chemical sector. And I think what we have to recognize is that global regime structures will vary. So in the water sector, we have a very monolithic regime structure. So we really see this gold standard that is probably even universally accepted around the globe. Not that it is implemented everywhere, but like it's kind of the idea that everybody kind of envisions to have in the future. And that will kind of vary. So we could also have like different solutions within global regimes that are kind of competing, and also in this competition can lie more the potential for transformative change. So when analyzing global regimes, one really has to take care of analyzing the distinct actor coalitions and who really has the definitional authority in global regimes to create and diffuse rationalities.
So great, yeah. So maybe that's a segue to a question I had for Stefano, I think, which also links to a question from Michael in the chat, which is, I think, well, to simplifying a lot, but if you think about sustainability transitions as a set of kind of theories of change, thinking about how change happens, there's the kind of the stereotypical dynamic between regime and niche, right? And maybe only recently has there been sort of more profound conceptual work on how really sectoral structures and differences there influence transition dynamics. And I think one of the values of GPN, GVC research, which is also something that you hinted to, and I think Oliver also mentioned, is that this GVC, GPN body of work has, in my view, developed rather sophisticated understandings of how sectors and value chains, production consumption systems differ. Obviously, with a sort of different rationales in terms of research questions and so on. But to use that, Stefano, I mean, what do you think transition research can learn from your field in terms of understanding sort of these sectoral structures and governance structures, and then maybe link that up to the question from Michael about how this plays out in coffee and wine value chains?
Should I start answering?
Please.
Okay, great. Maybe I'll start with some of the questions that already been posed in the chat, and then I'll come back to yours. So Michael saying that different market geographies may open new opportunities for different global governance arrangements, and focusing on wine and coffee in particular. And then there's a related question by Claudia about how sustainability challenges may, if my work is highlighting the tensions between different groups of actors. I just finished actually a big project on climate change in coffee in East Africa, and the kind of dynamics that are happening in coffee and wine, even though they're very different geographically and in terms of the market, are fairly similar. And the market geographies are changing in the sense that in both situations, in coffee in particular, essentially, if you want to stay in the same area and grow the same kind of coffee, you have to move up in altitude. While in wine, that is also the case, but you also have the possibility of moving in the northern hemisphere, move north, in the southern hemisphere to move south, which is creating a new, the geography of wine in Europe will be completely different in 20 years' time. To what extent that is going to create new opportunities for global governance arrangements, I don't know. And I don't think so. I'm fairly cynical here. What I'm trying to suggest here is that whatever instruments can be used to leverage power against the big players that are squeezing value out of smallholders will have to be rethought in view of the new geography and new actors that are coming into place. Both big wine merchants and big international traders for coffee are essentially saying, yeah, climate change is a problem because we have a portfolio approach. We'll always find a variety of coffees and wines that we can provide in either blends or in portfolios to our clients. So, okay, we're going to drop the coffee from Tanzania, so what? We're going to find the similar coffee somewhere else as climate changes. That's a very different perspective from a rooted geographical perspective of a smallholder that cannot move, essentially. And even if they move up on the hill, chances are that mountain is already forested, and if they want to export to Europe, for example, it would be going against the EUDR regulation against deforestation. So these sustainability challenges, as Claudia is highlighting, are actually creating a reconfiguration of power along these value chains and these production networks. And it is an open question about what is going to be happening in terms of the overall balance of power, but it's something that we need to keep doing research on. Your question of understanding governance structures, and it is something that we can offer to sustainability transition literature, because some of the sort of framings on regimes are very important, but sometimes it's quite difficult to put your hands on what element are we talking about. While in global value chains, we have a much more kind of hands-on. The value chain is the ontology. It has limitations, of course, because you're looking at one particular thing, but you will always find a point where you can put your finger on it and then try to unpack sort of the value, the power relations there. What we haven't done very well that we can learn from sustainability transitions is indeed about the bigger picture. It is not about the incumbents and the big global value chain actors, but these other actors that were mentioned in the third presentation. And in terms of our understanding of innovation is very limited and poor. And we tend to kind of observe it ex post. We're not very good at ex ante understanding where innovation is going to go. And so I think there's quite a good combination of grounds for mutual benefits here. I'm going to stop, otherwise I'm going to take too much time.
Thanks. Yeah, some very good reflections there. So I'll try to pass the word a bit over to in Oliver's direction now. And there are some questions, some rather big ones in the chat about pitfalls of translating GPN GVC work into transition studies. And then Micah has a question about system entitlers, and I'll let you answer that. But I want to just start off a little bit with the core thing that you talked about, namely sort of lead firms and incumbents. So which is sort of which are conceptualized differently in these two different sectors, but kind of straightforward that this kind of understanding of these actors makes sense when we're talking about established sectors. And like Stefano hinted at in GVC GPN research, it's mainly been about established sectors, right? There's not much there on these very new emerging industries, but that's of course an important topic in transition studies, new technology, innovation, emerging sectors. So how do you see this category of incumbents sort of, how does that fit in the context of emerging sectors, like some of the ones you're studying?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Marcus, and for the questions in the chat as well. Yeah, so I mean, GPN and GVC has sort of generally gravitated towards large, established, consolidated networks. In a sense, they have sort of studied networks in a phase of evolution, right, and haven't really paid too much attention, at least not sort of analytically and conceptually, to how do we sort of theorize emerging production networks, right? Something that I think is increasingly important as we are sort of entering a stage of sort of mass diffusion, at least in some sectors, right, where something like a global production network seems increasingly important and increasingly shaped by global dynamics. I mean, the case of lithium battery production being a very good example of that, I think. But I still think that GPN has something to offer regarding, and especially this idea of lead firms in relation to emerging industries. I think, so I'm doing some thinking together with Hui Wen on this at the moment, and we're sort of trying to think through sort of incumbent-led emerging industries, right? So this is true for especially the sectors that I'm looking at, so green hydrogen and green ammonia, green methanol, where we sort of see incumbent firms sort of using their legacy assets, their capital, their global networks to sort of branch into new sectors. So here I think sort of the GPN and GVC frameworks, they can sort of help unpack some of the drivers of some of these new networks. I mean, where I think GPN then doesn't, or GVC for that matter, I don't think has a very sort of granular account of sort of the different stages or different phases, or how these networks then sort of become global, right? And I think, and the dynamics sort of shaping that, and I think there is definitely more work to do there. But I still think it has some value. I mean, even if we think about the electric vehicle industry and battery production, I mean, which is very much sort of on Huywen's table, right? But I mean, that there is, yeah, it might not be your Volkswagen or Mercedes or your Chrysler, whatever that is sort of driving the transition and innovation towards electric vehicles, but we still see large battery producers, well established firms, just from a different network that are now entering sort of car manufacturing, right? So I think so I still think this idea of sort of incumbents and incumbency and large firms is super relevant to thinking about innovation and the trajectory of innovations. Yeah, I think that will, and I can just say very briefly on, because I actually think regarding the sort of question of sort of integrating GPN, GVC into the sustainability transition. I mean, there's lots of pitfalls, right? I'm almost reminded every day at the office with Thijs and Ellen, and Thijs is obviously also on the paper. So, I mean, he has sort of conceded a little bit, but I think in terms of sort of, and I haven't thought this sort of 100% through, but there is something about the object, right? The thing that we study, like Stefano says, GPN, GVC, it's the ontology, and the focus is the value chain, and in ST research is the socio-technical system, and they are obviously different from one another. And I think it is quite necessary maybe to sort of tease out more explicitly how they are compatible. Because I do think that they are compatible, but it's a question of whether we say that GPN, GVCs are sort of the productive infrastructure that sort of conditions these socio-technical systems and transformations. But I haven't thought this through sort of 100%, right? And I think also just speaking to the innovation perspective, I think there is. I agree with Stefano that GPN, GVC can learn a lot from SG research regarding sort of understanding innovation processes. So yeah, and I mean, I think I should stop there, Marcus, because and then maybe tackle.
Yeah, thanks. Very good reflections there. There's a question from Tessa to Jamila. Maybe you already read it, Jamila. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to reflect on that. So yeah, so it's about how to transform from Eurocentric rationalities to ones that are flexible, and bottom-up local interpretations. You know, how might power diffuse from these sort of regime bodies that may be a bit diffused to local groups? What's the kind of room there for agency? Maybe an interpretation there.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think this is definitely where we should work on finding out how this might be possible. I think the first question is like, how can we kind of empower like local groups to be able to transform global regime rationalities? So what are mechanisms of coalition building, collaboration locally, on how like one can come together to have like bigger bargaining power towards these global regime actors? I don't have any examples where I've seen that. Maybe even, I mean, there is, for example, this kind of bus rapid transit example where it was a rationality that was coming from the global south, where bus rapid transit systems were really transforming the urban mobility rationale across the globe even. And I think there was also very powerful coalition building between like local mayors, I think it was back then in Brazil and in Colombia, coming together with like local national advocates, but then also skillfully building coalitions with global organizations on how to bring this forward on the global scale. And I think we have to find these examples and to analyze them and to kind of generate lessons from how this was possible. Yeah, I would leave it with that. And I think we should definitely pay more attention to how we can enable that.
Anyone want to comment more on that, Stefano or Oliver? Or there are some big questions in the chat, which I think maybe we are better dealt with elsewhere. So, and also want to stay at this kind of trading zone. But as we're approaching the end here, also think about the sort of practically in terms of research design, I think the notion of the global can be rather intimidating. How do we study the global? So your reflections on that. I guess, I mean, Stefano, you kind of said something which I think is really essential, is that you follow actor networks, you follow actors, you see what they do, you understand their relations, and that's kind of, to me, a starting point for this kind of research. But I'd really like to hear your reflections on this.
Well, I mean, I come from a sort of global political economy perspective. So for me, the global is like my daily bread. But as a daily bread, it can be really hard to chew, right? And you can choke on it. So the key, at least in my experience with the value chain perspective, is to break it down in small bits, and then try to keep the sort of the global dimension in mind while you kind of dig in the very specificities that of power relations and governance structures and sustainability issues are embedded into very down-to-earth practical things that have to do, as was said before, with particular infrastructures in particular places in order to bring a particular product to a very particular market. And then as you build, your knowledge across different sectors, different value chains for different markets, then you start making a bottom-up sort of picture of, quote, the global, in ways that is obviously limiting, in the sense that you cannot have a complete picture like that. But as you find differences but also similarities, then you can bring out some of the kind of more the stronger arguments of, oh, okay, so this is happening in a fairly common way in very different sectors. Then we can start thinking about a really kind of global kind of perspective. And we're very good at doing that. On the other hand, there are technologies, there are innovations, there is finance that is coming in ways that are much more pervasive than can be understood in bits and pieces like we do. And so I think that the two perspectives, when we find in each other in the middle, I think that's where I find the potential there in very practical ways, in terms of how do we then identify research designs and epistemologies and ontologies that can help us to then come and understand, what kind of sustainability transitions are we looking at from the very local to the global level.
Great. Okay, so time was suddenly up. I want to, on behalf of the GEOST theme group, to thank the presenters first and foremost for great presentations and for this very engaging discussion, and participants also for great questions in the chat. Do remember that there are 2 more webinars, next coming up on 24th March. So you find it on our website, and do sign up, and then hopefully we'll see you again. And have a lovely day. Bye-bye.